I'm Dustin from Dusty Trails Workshop, and today I'm going to bring you that simplified version of that brick pattern cutting board that you have been looking for. So let's get into it. Now, the gentleman at the lumber store was adamant about telling me how wonderful this Padook was, and I'll be honest, I only had one word.
Wow. Enough drooling, let's get into it. So I'll start by planing this rough stock down on one side, remembering both side up.
Padook is probably my favorite wood species. Not only is it fun to say, but it's just so beautiful. I'll be honest, of planing down the lumber, it becomes some sort of systematic chaos, constant motion, almost a backwards, forwards, backwards marathon, or almost a revolution in limbo, tying this endless knot where you start to lose your train of thought and things beyond things becomes the only way to explain it. 10 out of 10, I had a blast. It was riveting. Worth it. So before I cut all these bricks up, while it's still exposed, I'm gonna hit it with my sander at about like 120. That way, when I go to glue this side, it's gonna be rough and there's gonna be more surface area for the glue to actually stick and just have a void so the glue can actually hold and bond well on this face of the lumber. To achieve a brick pattern design, we're going to make 3 varying blanks that resemble a checkerboard pattern. Your first blank will incorporate brick, mortar, brick, mortar, brick, mortar, and so on. Aside from the 3 varying blanks, it will involve another blank that is just the wood species that you chose for your mortar joints. This glue up will be the longest length, so your width or the length of your cutting board, depending on the variation of the horizontal or vertical pattern that you choose for the layout for bricks. When it comes to glue ups, the first glue up is the brick and mortar blank. This is a rip cut where you're gluing the edge grain to the edge grain. After the glue is dry, you'll rotate the board on your crosscut sled, remembering to cut these the desired thickness of your board. You'll set these cuts off to the side, and then you'll repeat this process for your mortar blank. Your first cut will be the thickness of your board, and then you will also incorporate the desired thickness of what you chose for your mortar joint. So you'll technically have to rip it twice. So when it comes to the rips for these grout joints, I prefer to have my cuts off to the left of the blade. That way I don't have any chatter issues or dangerous, hazardous issues per se. So technically what I do here is mark my template up against the fence and then have that blade kiss the top side of that board. That way there's no math involved. Yes, it's jockeying the fence back and forth, but that way, since I had an odd measurement, I think it was like 7/16, and I don't have to do a quarter off 7/16 every time. It was just easier for me in the long run. This would probably be one of those areas, if you had something like a bandsaw, it would be easier and more efficient to do it that way. Maybe I'll have room for a bandsaw, but until then, this is my method. As you see here, you can get quite creative with the orientation you put your brick pattern. At the end of glue up and unwrapping this Christmas gift, this is what they look like. Quick talk about wood movement. So with my mahogany, since it's the least dense of the wood species that I chose, there was a lot of wood movement, even from that brick cutout. It's just an important measure to always keep in mind. Alright, so with these blanks here, I alternated the Padook and the mahogany along with the maple stripes. They're going to wind up being these mortar joints for the maple and then the alternating brick pattern. And with these bad boys, I also made 3 other boards at this length and width, and then I'll put it on my crosscut sled and rip away. To increase the strength when I get that end result in the end grain, I also made a blank here that is going to represent in the brick world to be a bed joint. And anyways, I'm going to cut these the depth of my cutting board the same I would for those other ones, and then I'll skim these down to that same measurement that I used, which was a 1/4 inch. Before glue cleanup, I'm going the quick and dirty method here, just finding a piece of sandpaper and trimming up the high parts on my mortar joints. I was mainly worried about chatter issues on my table saw, and I didn't want any chip out running it through on my thickness blender. All you haters out there, don't you fret. I didn't mar the surface one bit. This next step, if you have a drum sander, you can skip this part and just run it through the drum sander. But I just cut this down to size for my thickness planer so I could clean up these boards. By now you've noticed that the paddock is starting to bleed in your maple and is becoming a problem. Well, this by all means isn't an end-all solution, but it definitely should help clean it up. Breaking down these blanks even further, we're cutting them down to the desired height of what you want your cutting board to be, following suits for the species that you used for your bed joints. From left to right here, I took it off my crosscut sled, made the desired depth for my cutting board, and then ripped it again. So I got 5 pieces from that original rip. Now you'll have to offset every other course. I just cut some small scrap down to make that adjustment. After 24 hours in the clamps, I'm using my CNC to flatten it out since, again, I don't have a drum sander, and it's too big for my lunchbox planer. It was a nice chance to practice my drumming skills. Now I'll pull out my dual shock disc sanders, go from 80 grit all the way up to 120 grit. It's completely up to you how high you want to go with your grits. Just remember to wipe down in between each grit change. Now that I removed most of the burn marks left over from my CNC, I made a little jig to offset the router bit and set up making my handles. Is that what you call them, or do you like call them handle grooves? I don't know. Quick question. Does anyone know what you technically call those? Now I'm just taking shallow passes here, and then once I have the one side to the correct depth, I'm just finding a piece of scrap and marking the depth, so when I flip it over, I'm going to have that same depth again when I go to make the second handle on the opposing side. Flopping out to my roundover bit, go team roundover, I can start setting up to add these little rubber feet to the bottom. I'll find this corresponding drill bit that matches the screw, then use my little jig here that has the proper offset for the foot placement. The reason I held off on roundovers on the bottom, just so the jig fits snug. Now that that's all said and done, I'll sand the tight spots by hand. 3 jigs in one video, you say? Another scrap fine. Trim it down to size, then round over the edges, and it'll slide right into the handles where you use that bowl bit. Taking care of that pesky paddock dust. Once that's all said and done, it's time to waterboard our cutting board. Now, are you typically a dunker or a wiper when it comes to oil in a cutting board? Let me know in the comments down below. Killer drum fill from my friend Tom. After applying the cutting board oil, I just buffed it on after about 5 minutes and just attached a microfiber pad onto my disc sander and then buffed for about 5 to 10 minutes. After all is said and done, I'm really happy with this. It was a first attempt for me, so I'm happy that it all came out, and then I'll have a few extra to make to sell on the side as well. It was about $300 worth of lumber, and I'm probably going to get 2.5 boards out of it. And with the scraps, I might find another fun scrap project. Catch you all on the next trail. Hope everyone enjoyed.